Okay. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome Daniel and Mark to the Wisdom Trends channel. As an introduction, I will go into the introduction slides, but let me go through the agenda first. For the audience, we are today going to look at Canadian immigration options for people who are residing in the United States. So Mark has a company, and he helps people move from United States to Canada, and he had different pathways, and we'll go into the details of that. He will go through some of the success stories, the actual people who he has helped in the recent years and months. Then Daniel will go into the Canadian immigration. How does that work? What are the different types of visas and programs? He'll give an overview of that. What are the different channels through which you can avail Canadian immigration? He will also go into the topic of Provincial Nominee Program, which is slightly different than the federal program. And then how to qualify for Global Talent Stream, which is one of the streams that is used by tech resources. And then Daniel will also cover two ways of tech workers that the tech workers can use the Global Talent Stream. And we will also go into the Q&A at the end. So I highly encourage all of you participants to write down your questions in the chat section in the Zoom, as well as if you are watching this on YouTube, you can post some questions on the YouTube as well. So we'll have somebody monitor the questions and we'll take them as they come. But first, let's go through the introductions. So let's go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so let me first introduce Daniel Mendelbaum. He is the Canadian immigration lawyer. He's based out of Toronto, and he owns an immigration law firm in Toronto. He represents clients throughout the world, including Canada, obviously, United States, and anywhere else. He has different services, obviously a lot of Canadian immigration services, but he also helps cross-border visa services for professionals and corporations seeking to relocate to Canada. So that's Daniel. Welcome, Daniel. Next slide.
Oh, Allison,
next slide. Can we go to the next slide?
Oh, it froze for a minute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that happens sometimes.
Yeah, that's okay.
Oh, here we go. We'll just...
Yeah. Okay, I think we skipped Mark's slide.
Yeah, this
okay,
is
yeah, this is here. It just came up. Okay, so Marc Pavlopolous, he is the CEO of Syndesis and Path to Canada. He has two companies, and he helps actually people relocate from Silicon Valley and from United States to Canada. And he has about 20 plus years of experience in VC-backed software startups. He's an American citizen, lived in Canada for several years, and found Syndesis in 2014. He also has another company, Path to Canada, and he will go over those and what are the service offerings that they allow. And then there are several different things that he will deep dive into, and I will let Mark talk about them. So I think with that said, I will jump into the topic without any further delays. So Mark, you want to take it away?
Thanks, Mandar.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll share a couple examples on the next slide, starting off with Pranav. It's the best way to see the two examples of the services is to hear the people that were helped. So Pranav's company came to us. This is right after COVID hit. He had an OPT expiration. He had to leave the US by, I think it was the end of 2020. So he knew, a lot of you on this call will be familiar with the scenario, third try of lottery, no success. You look at your OPT date of when you have the expiration of when you have to leave the US. His employer down in Dallas had seen one of our content pieces about being able to move a worker. So we had a call with them, and they said, software engineer, He has a software degree. The company said, we do not want to lose this worker. He's a key part of our team. He is a big contributor, and we understand that you can actually move a job. I said, this is exactly the scenario. So I had a conversation with Pranav, with his US employer down in Dallas, walked them both through the scenario. I said, basically, you will move from Dallas to whichever Canadian city you pick. And he says, how about Vancouver? I'm like, Vancouver's great. You could pick anywhere. And once you pick the city, it will take you during COVID. Daniel, you remember this case? Everything took quite a bit longer during COVID, but the border never closed to people who were trying to cross the border for work permits. So Pranav utilized Global Talent Stream. Daniel worked on the case. Pranav was able to leave the US before his OPT expired. He got into Canada. As Daniel will tell you, all Canadian work visas come with an open work visa for a spouse. So unlike the challenges Pranav and his wife faced in the US with her working, she had the ability to start working with an open work permit for any company. So he has been in Vancouver for a while now, basically took his laptop with him, same job, same title, same role, same reporting structure. Now he's 2 time zones off, and he continued doing his work from Vancouver. So that's what Syndesis can do when we say move your job to Canada. That is an example of what we can do, and we'll walk into a little more details about that later. What we'll do is we'll talk about the other success story. There's not just 2, there's dozens and dozens, but I'm covering the ones that are pertinent to both services we'll offer. So the other success story is through our Path to Canada service. This is basically for the majority of you in this call where you think, I'm not working for a company that's going to move my job. Maybe you're working for a Fortune 500 company. Maybe you're working for a consulting firm. In this case, for Path to Canada, this is where you basically take your future into your hands and say, I would like to find a Canadian company that will sponsor my work visa. It's not my current company. I'm going to have to go in a new direction. So we were connected to Chaitanya, and actually, Mandar, as you know, Chaitanya was a listener to your show, and he became aware of this option from the previous interview we had. So we filled out the form on Path to Canada, and turns out we had interviewed with him, and he matched with a couple opportunities. He interviewed with companies, was hired, moved to Canada in January. I got to meet him in person in February, right after, about a month after he got to Canada. So the first few people, Path to Canada, moved up. We're all at this dinner, and it was enlightening for me, for all of us in attendance there, to hear Chaitanya's story. But one thing that stood out when we asked him, about his journey to the U.S. and his journey to Canada, I don't want to consider this a highlight. It was just something that struck a chord with us when he said, hey, I had my H-1B, but also that's not having a work visa is not enough. It's permanent residency, it's green card, and facing an extended wait, a wait that was way too long. He felt his entire future was uncertain. And he described other people he knew in a similar situation of like, work visa is not enough. If you're never going to get permanent residence, or you're on a 20, 30, 40-year wait, how can you bring your family over? How can you establish roots? And we understood that. And having dinner with him, sitting in Toronto, describing what was possible, it was like a whole different world for him. He basically felt he had surety. He was working on permanent residence. He was in Canada. He enjoyed his job very much. That is an example of what we can do with Path to Canada.
Yeah, and it didn't take too long, Marc, right? We had this interview with you sometimes in the middle of last year, and then he came to know about your company and he got in touch with you. So it was pretty fast, right? I mean, the process in terms of the methodical approach to shifting job and getting a visa and moving to Canada, it wasn't too long. So that was really good success story there.
Yeah, we'll walk through some of the timelines later slides. But Daniel, over to you.
Thanks, Marc. So to pick up actually where you left off, it is actually a much faster and simpler option than anything that you find in the United States. We have in Canada fast-track immigration systems designed to attract the best and the brightest, to attract skilled workers from all over the world. Your audience, Mandar, may be familiar with express entry. It's our fast track immigration program. It's a competition. People have to submit their profiles or their resumes to the government of Canada and wait for an invitation. Once invited to apply, the application process typically takes about 6 months, although there are some delays because of COVID. And as your audience may or may not be familiar with, there has been a pause on invitations for quite some time for some of the program categories. There has not been a pause on the provincial nominee programs, which is why we decided that it would be a good idea to add that to our presentation today to talk about provincial nominee programs. However, the immigration minister did announce that this pause on federal skilled worker and Canadian experience class is going to be lifting at the second half of this year. So that could mean a couple of months, it could mean 8 months from now in December, but hopefully sooner than later. When a person acquires permanent residency in Canada, after 3 years of residing here physically, they can be eligible for Canadian citizenship and get a passport, which is wonderful for a lot of your audience that works in tech. Maybe they're software engineers, maybe they're systems analysts, business analysts, management consultants. With a Canadian passport, they can even return to the United States under a TN visa category to get work visas. So that means basically that you have a fast track to skip the line on lengthy U.S. immigration visa processing. As Marc described, in the United States, even if you manage to win an H-1B lottery, you can be waiting years and years and years to get your U.S. green card. This way, you come to Canada on a work permit through one of Marc's companies, getting a global talent stream work visa, which I'll talk about in a moment, transition over to a permanent residency visa, and then after 3 years, you're a citizen, and you can come back to come back to the United States with a Canadian passport. So it's a much more attractive option. So let's talk about how this works. Allison, if you don't mind, we're going to talk about the global talent stream. This is a fast track work visa program. I believe the next slide, Allison, will outline sort of the steps involved in getting a global talent stream, who's eligible for this, and exactly. So we've got here a number of occupations where people can be eligible for a global talent stream work visa. They're high-tech positions, business savvy positions, generally related to working in tech, but not exclusively. There are some positions where you can work outside of tech, for example, mathematicians, statisticians, but the core ones are tech-related positions. And if you do work or get a job offer to work from a Canadian company in one of these positions, you can get a work visa. The process is pretty quick. The company will apply for a position approval. That typically takes 2 weeks. If it's through Syndesis, we see position approvals much quicker than that, given their history of working with the temporary foreign worker program. And then following that, you apply for a work visa. If you require a visa to enter Canada, you apply online, and the government has a processing commitment to process those applications in 2 weeks or less. But due to COVID-related backlogs, backlogs related to Canada's prioritization of work visas for persons from Afghanistan and now Ukraine, things are taking a little bit longer, probably about 2 months now to get a work permit.
It used to be 2 to 3 weeks, right, Daniel, in the past? Yeah, it was very quick, I remember.
Very quick, 2 weeks plus, the time it would take to take a passport and send it for, visa issuance at a visa office. But things have slowed. The government of Canada has really been backlogged with these other priorities. First with COVID, and now with priorities relating to cleaning up their backlogs from COVID and providing priority processing for Ukrainian citizens right now. Okay, so I think move to the next
I
slide.
will ask one question here, and I'm pretty sure a lot of audience would have and pertaining to this slide, basically. So one thought that comes to my mind is, say, for instance, somebody is working in the US with a company, with a tech company, and they are in the job category that would allow them to apply for global talent stream. Would they be able to use their job profile from the US to apply for this global talent stream, or would they have to first get a job in Canada in the same category before they can apply?
Well, that's where Marc's company steps in. Marc, maybe you want to field that and talk a little bit about how Syndesis would take on that role. I think there are certain companies that may meet the profile and others that wouldn't necessarily meet the profile.
Yeah, so Mandar, to answer your question, part of applying for Global Talent Stream is an offer from a Canadian company. So in either scenario, so in the move your job to Canada, in the scenario where I'll use the scenario of Pranav, he would have fit perfectly because we would say, well, Syndesis is a Canadian employer of record, also called a PEO. We have permission from the Canadian government to bring in dozens of workers. So we would say sponsoring company. And Pranav does qualify. He's a tech worker. He qualifies for Global Talent Stream based on the title of the NOT code that was on the previous slide. And he has a job offer for a Canadian company. So that job offer would be the new job offer. It could be a carbon copy of the one he has in the US, senior engineer, whatever, but it's still a tech job. And then he would qualify in that way. And then for if you use the example for Chaitanya, it is the Canadian company who hired him. They're sponsoring the work visa. So in that case, they would say, yes, we are using Global Talent Stream. Part of the requirements is a job offer from a Canadian company. We are a Canadian company and we are making that job offer, whatever they would negotiate directly with the worker, as long as it qualifies, as Daniel said, for a Global Talent Stream.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks, Marc.
It is very quick too, relatively speaking. I mean, one of the things to keep in mind, I suppose, to contrast this with the H-1B program is you can apply for this 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So you don't need to wait for a lottery process to open in end of March, beginning of April, win a lottery, and then get your work visa in October. There's no need for a labor market test either. This is companies who are tech or have committed to innovation, hiring Canadians such as Syndesis, who can benefit from this program. And because they're growing companies and they're committed to hiring Canadians, the government of Canada turns around and says, well, if you're going to hire Canadians, we can allow you to hire foreign workers as well in these high-tech, business savvy kind of roles. So there's no caps on it either, which is also interesting.
Yeah, that is a very good point, Daniel. I was just going to ask you, were there any numerical limits for these Global Talent Stream?
No. And to be honest with you, it's still a relatively underutilized program. The government of Canada consistently sets targets and doesn't seem to be able to meet it. A lot of companies just don't know about it. Canadian employers are largely naive to the benefits and value of this program. That's been my experience. I'm sure, Marc, you probably experienced the same thing with connecting with companies and through Path to Canada. And certainly American companies probably don't even know, for the most part, would even think of the option of contracting with a company like Syndesis to move their workers to Canada. And then once you present it, Marc, I know we've spoken about this at length in the past. They're kind of shocked that these options even exist. So we're nowhere near, I think, the Canadian government even contemplating a cap on this program. There's room for this thing to grow, and I think that's something important to keep in mind. It does then lead to options for workers to obtain a green card equivalent in Canada, Canadian permanent residency. And what that basically means is if you work for a Canadian company for a year on this Global Talent Stream work visa and pass an English language test, you can qualify for one of the programs that are managed by our express entry system. That would be the Canadian experience class. Even if you are a foreign skilled worker, and let's say you've got a master's degree, a few years of work experience, you just finished your F1 OPT, and your English is great, you might be competitive on express entry, but maybe not. Maybe you're a little bit older and don't have the points required to be competitive. What this does is allows you to get those points to become more competitive, so that way you can receive an invitation to apply. So that's really what sets it apart. And in terms of immigration levels, the vast majority of immigrants who are coming through this program typically have a passport from India or China. Those are the two most common passports that the government of Canada sees. And from our permanent residency system as a whole for skilled workers, the largest category or group of immigrants are tech workers coming from India or China. Not necessarily from there; they could be in the United States, but their passport, their country of origin is India or China. In the United States, that leads to backlogs. In Canada, that's just a fact of diversity, I suppose, just the way things are. So there's no quotas, no limits. And the processing targets every year the Canadian government has been raising. For the last 10 years, the governments have raised that target. I think we're upwards of 450,000 permanent residency admissions as a target per year. So that kind of level hasn't been seen since the 1910s. So Canada's only making things more open. At the same time, it's very competitive. There's lots of people from all over the world who want to come, and so coming through the global talent stream is certainly a way to get you a leg up.
Yeah, and while we are on this topic, just one additional question. People in the US, when they are on the visa, on a non-immigrant visa, work visa, they are always worried about their approvals. Even if you have your first approval when you are doing your extensions or amendments, there is a chance that your application may get denied. Can you throw some light on how is the situation about this global talent stream? Is it fairly easy to get once you have that eligibility, or are there any pitfalls?
Right. Easy is a question that I suppose is relative, and it depends who's handling the situation. For us, working with Marc, we have had a very high success rate. I don't recall, Marc, us even having a refusal, but I can't speak to someone's individual circumstances. There are reasons why a person could be refused a visa for Canada, based on inadmissibility, past history of immigration non-compliance, or whatever the case may be. Relative to the United States, though, yes, it's easier, right? The Canadian government as a whole has designed a program and a system for attracting skilled immigrants. You can't attract high-tech skilled immigrants by making a program difficult for people to apply to. It doesn't mean that your application can have deficiencies. It has to be a well-prepared, properly prepared application. And for that to happen, I would recommend you hire a professional, hire an immigration attorney to help you with that. I ask clients a very simple question. I can't renovate my kitchen, right? I wouldn't even try. I'd start making holes in walls, and pipes would be bursting, and the water would be squirting everywhere. I'd get electrocuted, right? There are some people though who are quite handy, who are capable of doing some kind of work like that, and I just know I'm not that kind of person. So if a person feels that they have the ability to undertake a highly technical, specialized task on their own, and don't want to risk it, I think it's not a risk to them, by all means. But as a general rule, I think you're better off hiring a professional for something like this. There are a lot of ways that an application can fail, but there's only one way it can succeed, right? It's got to be.
That is a very good point, Daniel. Yeah. And I always tell on my channel, no matter how simple it seems, because it is so important for you in your career and in your life, why do you want to take chances? Just let the professional handle it. So
right. It's not worth it. And certainly renovating my kitchen isn't worth my marriage. So I wouldn't try that without a professional contractor. Right. Yeah. So I think what the next topic of conversation would be provincial nominee programs. There's a lot to unpack here. People ask me about provincial nominee programs. What is a provincial nominee program? How does this relate to express entry? How can I use this provincial nominee program? I think it's really important to understand what these are. So it's another pathway for foreign nationals to obtain ultimately permanent residency, and that's through a sponsorship by a province or a territory of Canada. So a prospective immigrant must intend to actually to reside in that province or territory that nominates them. And if they're already in Canada, they may already need to be resident in that province to demonstrate that they have a genuine intention to live there. Okay. We have on this next slide, Allison, programs, streams, and systems. Okay, I don't want to get too technical, but it's important to understand what a program is, what a stream is, and what a system is to really gauge what this is all about. So a program, a provincial nominee program, is just general eligibility criteria. Streams are subcategories of these programs where they have additional qualification criteria, and the systems are the ways in which it's determined who may apply. Okay, so our program types, we have programs for skilled workers, we have programs for Canadian college or university graduates, and we have programs for entrepreneurs and investors. Regarding stream types, we have open stream. That means you don't need a job offer, you don't have to have current status in that province. Anybody can apply. For example, a skilled worker, you can apply if they meet the criteria of the program. Okay, we have temporary status streams. So you have to be either working in Canada on a work permit or recently completed your studies. We have an employer-driven job offer stream. That means you have a job offer from the employer. And then we have something called occupationless streams. You're working in an occupation, or you've recently acquired work experience in an in-demand occupation. Okay. And then lastly, we have, in terms of systems, open and closed. So an open system means anybody can apply directly if they meet the program and stream criteria. Usually those are first come, first serve, and they're controlled by program quotas or caps. And then we have a closed system. So you have to express your interest in moving to the province by creating what's called a profile or an expression of interest application. Then you have to wait to receive an invitation. And invitations are awarded to those who can outcompete others. I think the best way to sort of illustrate this is to talk about a couple of different nomination programs. So the first one is Ontario. Alice, if you want to go to the next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about the Ontario Tech Draw. All right. If you work in a tech occupation and you qualify as a skilled worker, this is what we call a skilled worker program. It's occupation in demand, and it's a closed competitive system. So I outlined the different types of systems and streams and skilled worker. We've drilled it down to one specific type. To be eligible, you have to have at least a year of recent full-time paid work experience in any of the occupations listed under this experience list. So 0213 or 2172, 2173, 748. And if anybody's not familiar with these codes, these are all codes for people who work in computers. You're either a manager of information systems or software department, or you work in data analysis, web development, software design, or software engineering. These are the Tech Draw Ontario eligible occupations. You have to have a university degree, so either bachelor's, master's, or PhD. You have to pass a language test. The way that you apply is that you go online to the Government of Canada's website for express entry, and you submit your federal express entry profile, and you select that you're interested in Ontario or in all provinces and territories. And then you wait. You can't really do anything beyond that. If the Government of Ontario is interested in you, they will send you a notification of interest. If they're not interested in you, you won't get a notification of interest. If your profile is prepared properly, you'll get that notification of interest if you're competitive against other candidates. So sometimes it helps to have a professional look at that profile, make sure it's prepared properly so that we are getting the points that are needed. And if you are invited by Ontario, you apply to the Government of Ontario. After you've applied, it takes a couple of months, Ontario will come back to you and say, oh, look, you actually do meet the program criteria. Here's our nomination certificate. You take that nomination certificate, and now you can apply for federal express entry. So everyone's been looking at these rounds of invitation and only seeing provincial nominee program, provincial nominee program, provincial nominee program. Since September of 2021, that's all we've seen through the express entry program. Well, that's how people who were destined to Ontario received their nominations. They created a profile, Ontario reached out to them, they applied to Ontario, and then they came back into the express entry pool with a nomination. Okay. And I know, Mandar, you probably have some questions for me. I want to just quickly talk about BC's program, which is in the next slide, and then I'll pause for a moment. You can ask questions about how this works.
Sure.
This one is another skilled worker program. it's skilled worker under the tech stream. Again, it's occupation in demand. So you have to be in one of these occupation codes listed here. And it's a closed competitive system. The difference between this and Ontario is that you have to have a full-time paid job offer from an eligible employer in BC, right? You have to have 2 years of relevant work experience, not one. And there's no education requirement, but higher levels of education make you more competitive. Right? So we can see there's some differences from the Ontario program. Ontario doesn't require a job offer. You don't have to be in Canada. BC, you need a job offer. You can be in Canada, you can be outside of Canada, but you need a job offer from a BC employer. 2 years, not 1 year of experience. No education, but are you going to be competitive against other candidates if you have a high school education? Maybe not, right? Now, you have to create a federal express entry profile if you want to go through the federal express entry stream. However, BC also gives you the option of not going through express entry. Either way, you have to go and actively submit a profile to BC to be considered a candidate. All right. So in the Ontario case, you don't have to submit anything to Ontario to express an interest. You just check off Ontario on your federal express entry application. For BC, they say, no. Apply to us. Let us know that you're interested. And if you are interested, we will select you. So that part of the process is the same as Ontario. You have to wait for them to reach out to you. And when you are invited to apply, then you apply, they evaluate your application, and you go into the pool of candidates back into the federal pool for express entry, or you apply directly for PR for the federal government if it wasn't through express entry. One thing I want to point out here is that because this one is job offer dependent, if you lose that job offer, your application is done. So if a person has been nominated by BC based on this stream, and they're going through the non-express entry route, which takes longer, it takes about 12 to 18 months to process that application, and then they lose their job, or the company goes bankrupt, or they reorganize and shuffle, your permanent residency for Canada, unfortunately, that application is going to be terminated by the government. Whereas if you go through the express entry route, this can be combined with express entry. It's faster. So we usually try to put people through the faster stream, express entry being 6 months versus the non-express entry route being 12 to 18 months, because of this level of risk that somebody has. You can't switch job offers either. So if you got a job offer from an eligible BC employer, you're locked in. If you go to another employer, BC is not necessarily going to allow you to move employers. You have to get permission from them. So that's a lot of information, Mandar. I'm sure you and your audience has a ton of questions for me. And Marc, maybe you do too, but happy to field some questions on this.
Maybe what we can do is I have one big question that might be on everybody's mind, and then I'll stop with the questions, let Marc finish his part, and then we'll take the remaining questions that are towards the end. So one of the biggest question that comes to my mind, and usually I get around, pardon me about the noise. Okay. Is regarding the permanent residency in the Canada. So I made several videos in the past where I explain what are the qualifications, how do you get the points to be able to qualify for PR in Canada. And one of the biggest factor is your age. So remember, people who are professionals who come to US, apply for H-1B, study, by the time they get into the green card queue, and when they start realizing it's going to take a long time, they're already in their 30s or maybe even closer to 40s. So how wise is it for them to make a decision to move to Canada through this talent stream? I know you mentioned that it will give them the points for their job, but also knowing that even though they are closer to their 35 or 40 years of age, they can still have a pathway to Canadian permanent residency. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, age is definitely a factor. When a person turns 30 years old, they start to lose points on the federal express entry system. And by the time a person is 33, we have to start thinking about creative options for allowing them to outcompete other candidates. They'll be losing points for age if you're in your mid-30s and 40s, that's true. But by working in Canada for a Canadian employer on a global talent stream work permit for 1 year and having that arranged employment, they'll make up a lot of points. You get, it's not exactly a straight number that I can give you. We have different factors, and then those factors will combine. So for example, a person will earn, if they're single, well, you give the example of a married person with children. So let's say 35 points for 1 year of Canadian work experience, plus 50 points for range in employment, that's 85. The maximum points that a married person can get for age is 100, right? So they've made up 85 out of the 100 points. Now, on top of that, the Canadian work experience that a person obtains combines with other factors. It's like a multiplier. So if you have a bachelor's degree in Canadian work experience, you get more points for having that Canadian work experience than if you just had a bachelor's degree. If you have Canadian and foreign work experience or in a language test, you get even more points for having that Canadian work experience. So you end up, it's possible to gain more than 100 points and make up for the lack in age if you're applying from inside of Canada. In this situation, we have a global talent stream work permit than outside of Canada. So it's definitely not something I would say if you're 45 and getting 0 points for age, don't apply. No. By all means, you can still be competitive.
Yeah, that's a great point, Daniel. Thanks for clarifying.
Let's see if there's anything else that I need to go through here. Nope, I think this is now back to you, Marc, right?
Yes, Daniel, thanks for the overview. And so what I'll do is I'm going to switch a little bit to application of some of the information that Daniel shared specifically around the work visa. So both scenarios, move your current job to US job to Canada. That was the example we gave with Pranav, how he moved from Dallas to Vancouver, or just getting a tech job. I'm going to dive into more depth of how Chaitanya was able to move from Miami to Toronto. So how to move your tech job to Canada. So in this scenario, Syndesis is a Canadian employer of record, professional employer organization, different terms. What they basically mean is we're a Canadian corporation that legally employs Canadian workers in Canada. We also have permission from the Canadian government to bring in dozens of tech workers and actually sponsor their work visa. So in this scenario, we can, as Daniel described, it would be using the Global Talent Stream program. This program is compared to waiting, as Daniel described, some of the waits for permanent residents. This is basically 3 months with some delays. Maybe it's 3.5 months from start to finish. You get your work permit, you move into Canada. The work permit's awarded. There is no, even during COVID, Pranav had to test. I remember the conversations with him. There was COVID tests before he got into Canada, like right before he was in Seattle testing. But even in the midst of a pandemic, border remained open for work permit people who were approved. And as I said earlier, this is the scenario. This is only going to work for a very few of you, but it's basically your same job, same pay, same laptop, same US boss. You're now working remotely from Canada. And the people who are in this situation, it is the majority of the time, it's third strike on H-1B lottery, OPT expiring. And a lot of times the conversation with your US employer is the US employer says, I'm sorry, if you're returning to Singapore, if you're returning to Pakistan, India, you are too many time zones away. We can't keep you employed. So this is usually like the bad scenario for everyone. For the worker, it's the end of their US dream. For the company, it's a valued person on the team has to leave and they're moving back home. They're far too removed from the team to still be on it. But this scenario, basically, if we jump to the next slide, please, you qualify for Global Talent Stream, as Daniel said, offer from a Canadian company, Canadian 1 year work experience. You don't have to have a tech degree for Global Talent Stream. We had someone qualify who had several years, I think, actually I shouldn't say several years, it was 5+ years as a front-end engineer. They were qualified based on their work experience. It is remote. The unique part about this, and this is the challenge for most of you, is it's not only your decision. So on the call we moved Pranav up, it wasn't just his decision. He bought in entirely, says, I want to do that. His US employer was always with the calls on us because we basically said, Pranav, are you in favor? Yes, we mapped out all the Canadian immigration options. As Daniel said, he's like, this sounds great. This is the right thing for me and my family. But then to execute it, it's the US company. They were also on the call and they said, yes, we're going to do this. We will pay for the work visa fees. We will pay for the fees for Syndesis. We understand that once Pranav is in Canada, Syndesis is sponsoring his Canadian work visa. That's step one. When he crosses the border to start working, Syndesis will handle his remote employment. We're not a Canadian corporation. We can't do that, but Syndesis can. They will provide his employment, his healthcare, his 401k, everything else he'd have in the US, Syndesis can mirror in Canada. So that it was the company making a decision of, we're going to do this, we're going to pay for this, let's go, let's get Pranav to Canada, which we did. But I really want to emphasize that the third bullet there is, and this is something we're proud of, there are no costs. For either service, there's never a cost to the worker for anything. It's always the employer that picks up all the costs. But in the case of moving your job, we can't emphasize this enough, your employer has to be on board with it. They're signing a contract with Syndesis. They're paying the fees, and then long term, when you're in Canada, they're gonna be paying us a monthly fee to employ you. So then we can jump to the next slide. So for maybe 1 or 2% of you happen to be a situation with OPT expiring and a US company that's willing to work with you, wants to keep with you, wants to keep you on the team, and wants to explore this option. For 98 or 98% of the rest of you, you're on your own. You're in the situation of Chaitanya, where you said, look, my US employer, I've got the H-1B, or I'm in the US, or maybe you're outside of the US. You might be watching this and say, yeah, I used to live in the US. I had to leave after OPT expired. I'm back in home country. I'd like to be back in North America. This is a great option too. We say that a lot of people for Path to Canada from the US, that is not the requirement. 75% of the people in our database are from the US. The other 25% are rest of the world. Some work remotely for US or Canadian or British companies, from Pakistan, from India, from Taiwan, from China. Others may have been in the US for a while and had to leave, or they've never been in the US and they realize it's difficult to just get from the US. They look at Canada and say, this is a great option. That's the Path to Canada service. That's what we can do for you. So on the next slide, I can walk through basically an overview of what it is. I think one description I think that's very solid is it's a marketplace. We are connecting qualified global tech workers. Many of them have US experience and US education. Some of them are IT grads, did not go to US universities, but they have top global educations. We're connecting them with Canadian companies who will interview them, hire them, sponsor the Canadian work visa through Global Talent Stream, and bring them into Canada. As a permanent move, I always want to emphasize, there's a few people who think like, oh, can I work remotely for Canadian companies? That is not what our goal is here. Our goal is to give you the complete Canadian experience. Work visa gets you in fast. Once you're in, as Daniel says, then you can apply for permanent residence. You are in Canada. You're on a work permit. Unlike the US, I remember asking Daniel this question during COVID. I said, well, COVID, someone gets in, the company in Canada maybe has to do a layoff. Is Canada throwing people out? What the US was doing, he's like, no, Canada's not going to be throwing people out who came in during a work permit and their company ran into financial trouble. They will be able to find work for other companies that will sponsor their work permit. So it's a different attitude in Canada than what we have here in the US. One last slide, I think, about how it works. Path to Canada website. We'll show at the very end. You fill out the Am I a Candidate form. It's just asking basically your name, where you're at, what's your intent to move to Canada, what connection to your LinkedIn profile, your CV. Want to learn a little bit more about you. We basically qualify you. So when it says qualified candidates, we take that seriously out of respect for the worker. We have 2 video conversations with you. It's not a matter of going into a database with your fingers crossed. If you get to the database and we think you qualify, first conversation with our team in Canada is to find out why you want to move to Canada, what's your current situation, what type of job you're looking for. But we're also going to ask you the tough questions. We've had people who've been on they were working for Silicon Valley companies. We've heard of salaries of $400,000 and $500,000 US. One of the applicants said, well, I was looking for the exact same in Canada. We are very straightforward. It's like, that is a Silicon Valley type of salary that is not going to happen in Canada. You have to realign your expectations. We're very clear on that. For some people, they can't accept it. For other people we've met, for other people who've gone through it, they said, I want to get to Canada. You know what? Maybe 2 years down the road, after I get in, work for a Canadian company, If I want I want to get one of those, a much larger salary, maybe I'll go try and work for Amazon Canada or Google Canada. Of course you can. You're in Canada, you get permanent residence, you can work for anyone you want. We're just trying to get you in and get you in the process going. So we video interview you twice. Then basically, if step 4, if you're a match, we always ask your permission. We do not drop you in front of our clients. Our recruiting team reaches out to you and says, hey, there's a job, you're a full stack engineer, here's a crypto company, here's an insurance company, hey, and here's a startup in e-commerce space. You might look at those as a candidate and say, crypto's too crazy, forget that opportunity. The other 2 are great, please send me over. You go over there, then the company interviews you, we step out of it. Every company has their own interview process. When it finishes up and they make a verbal offer to you and you decided to accept it, then the Canadian immigration lawyer steps in and says, let's get your work visa going. 8 to 10 weeks, it says in step 5, as Daniel said, that's turning out to be a little longer. It's turning out to be 3 months. Now we're looking at 12, 14 weeks. We're hoping that goes away for the work visas, but work permits is issued. You get the notice to get your passport stamped. It's time to come to Canada. We have people within 2-3 weeks after that. They're out of their apartment in the US. They're leaving their home country, flying into Canada. They start their job the next day they're in Canada. It's that fast.
That's great. Marc, I would like to ask you one question that comes to my mind from my discussion with a lot of people who come to me on the Canada option. One of them is some people work for, say, US company, and they are at a border town, like maybe Seattle or Detroit, or maybe even Buffalo, Niagara Falls, and things like that. And they plan to live in Canada and work in the United States. Have you seen some of those situations, and do you have any input in terms of would you help them reside in Canada, work from Canada? Obviously, the US company will need to have an entity in Canada, and you would be providing that part to them. So did you come across those sort of situations?
I'm not sure if I can answer your exact question, but I'm going to answer a variation of that. So we've had, so for the example, where we move your job to Canada, as we did for Pranav, like there are people who said, Marc, I'm moving to Canada, the job's remote. And they said, but I have US clients. So I'm going to be moving to Canada, same scenario as Pranav, but I'm going to be on a plane flying into the US, like, twice a month, 3 times.
Exactly. Yeah. That kind of situation.
The answer is no, because that's not going to work. I wish we had an American immigration lawyer on this call. And I don't know if Daniel, if you have any knowledge,
right.
But the idea of like, if your OPT expired and US immigration very well knows that, you leave, before the expiration time, you follow the rules, you leave the US before then, you're in Canada, you're not jumping across the border constantly, going back to do your old job in the US. That's not going to work. That's one thing we always emphasize, Mandar. It has to be a remote job. You do not have, unfortunately, the freedom to show up in the US at will every week, like some people ask, like, oh, can I come down? That's not going to work.
Okay.
US immigration, no problem.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Marc. Occasional business visit, like, you want to go 1-2 times a year, maybe 3 times a year, and meet with the team. That may be okay for like a couple of days, team meeting to gather information. It's got to be a business visit. You can't be going
exactly
to the United States to work. You need an authorization to work in the United States to work.
Right.
And as Marc, absolutely, you're right. You pointed out, you just had an OPT. You were just working for a US employer. Now you're in Canada and your Canadian company has a contract with that employer. What do you think they're going to ask you if you have you want to apply for now a B1, B2 visa? Of course, that's going to come up. Well, you're going down for business meetings. Why do you need to come back so quickly for a business meeting? If you get the visa, that's the question that you're going to get when you get to the airport.
That's
so
right.
we actually do assist some clients with obtaining visas to go to the US for business meetings, but we try to put some time and some distance between when they come to Canada and get their work visa to the time they go back to the United States, and then distance and time between those trips. It's recommended.
Yeah.
The last thing we want to do is put your
Visa in trouble.
admissibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we don't want to put that at risk.
Yeah,
The whole idea here is to make it easy.
exactly.
Yeah. And then in the future, when you get your Canadian citizenship, I mean, look,
then it's free to
you get your Nexus card, you can get your just right. It's a price you got to pay for a few years.
Yeah. So no, that's great clarification. I have one follow-up question, and then I think we can jump into the few of the other topics in the chat. I know, and I want to make it very clear, I'm not a tax consultant, neither is Daniel, and neither is Mark. But this question comes up very often to me. What are the tax obligation if you're working for a US employer and you are working from Canada, doing the same job, reporting the same manager? And the way I handle this question is when you're working in Canada, you are actually working for a Canadian entity of the US subsidiary, right? And then you're most probably paid in Canada and you have to file your taxes in Canada. But can you throw some light on that kind of situation? I mean, we don't have to go into the depths because tax is a totally different issue, but just to give a general overview. Yeah.
Coincidentally, Mandar, I had dinner last night with a cross-border Canadian US expert that I've had on webinars, et cetera. So this is exactly her space, and the question comes up a lot. So if I use the examples of Mandar, so Pranav in Dallas, paying taxes in the US, OPT expires, has to leave. He moves to Canada. So Syndesis very clearly does not hire him as a contractor. We hire him as an employee in Canada. He has an employment contract with Canadian rights. It's all Canadian law. That employment contract is part of the application that Daniel would provide for a global talent stream. It's a Canadian compliant contract. He now is not employed in Canada. He's employed by Syndesis, a Canadian corporation. We treat him as an employee in Canada. He gets, at the end of the year, what's called a Canadian T4, which says, here's your income. Here's all the taxes that were taken out, paid already to the Canadian government. He gets pay stubs. Maybe he owes a little bit, maybe gets a refund back, but he is paying Canadian taxes because he's working for a Canadian company. There is no obligation in the US. OPT's expired. He left the US, never going back. There is no connection to the US IRS, no connection in the US at all. All ties were severed when he crossed into Canada because he's legally living, being employed in Canada, paying taxes in Canada. Same scenario, Mandar, for Chaitanya or anyone for Path to Canada. When they get a job in Canada, they move to Canada. The Canadian company gives them a Canadian offer letter, pays them their salary as an employee, not a contractor. There are no contractors coming into Canada under these work permits. They're coming in as employees. All the Canadian companies hire them. Maybe they're providing Canadian stock options. They'll do whatever they do as part of their compensation package. Same scenario. That company is Canadian. They are paying, the workers paying taxes in Canada, living in Canada, residing in Canada, Canadian healthcare, US.
Excellent. Yeah. No, thanks for clarifying that. There is another interesting question I see in the chat, and maybe we can talk about this as well. As Daniel was mentioning, this global talent stream process used to take like 2 or 3 weeks. You would get a visa in 2 or 3 weeks. Now it's taking about 3 months or so. Are Canadian employers willing to wait that long for the employee to come with this visa? How does that work practically?
You have some. I have some insight. Daniel, do you have something to share?
We're probably going to say the same thing, so I'll let you go with it.
So this question comes up. So for on the side of moving your job, it doesn't come up then because the question, the U.S. company usually has like, they don't wait until the OPT expires in 3 months. Usually it's 6, 7, 8 months away, and the worker stays in the U.S. until, it gets close sometimes, Daniel, you get within those 30 or 60 days, we're like, okay, we're really getting close here, but then workers gotten in, it's been okay. So on the US side, if someone moving their job, it's usually not an issue because the person's still in the US and has legal compliance. Hopefully their employer did not wait until 50 or 60 days. On the Path to Canada side, it comes up all the time. So I shouldn't say it comes up all the time. Some employers understand it. Our pushback to the Canadian employer is, oh, you didn't like that 3-month waiting time, or maybe it's 4 months to get a job. How long was the waiting time for you to find a Canadian engineer to fill this role? Same time frame? Probably. Maybe longer because the competition's so crazy. And then you got an HR person saying, yeah, okay, you're right. It was a long time to hire. We wish we could work, we could do something different. What we're telling them now is if the worker's in the US and they have to wait to cross the border, we tell them there is no recourse. That worker is on an H-1B in the US. They are working for the US company. They will quit that job the moment the work visa comes through and not before. You can't contract with them. That violates, unless you want to, you can't sponsor an H-1B for them. So for the workers in the US, you need to be patient. Let the paperwork come through. The moment it does, believe me, that worker is going to give their notice. They will quit their US job. Path to Canada helps people move to Canada. We do everything we can, from providing webinars on like how to get a Canadian Social Security number, how to get your first apartment, how to get your first bank, how to build credit in Canada. We're mapping all that stuff out with monthly webinars to help speed the process. We do all that for free. But if the person is outside of the US, that's where we've decided, okay, we might have to offer some flexibility. We're looking into the option of, could that worker possibly do some kind of a consulting arrangement while they're waiting? We're doing our research on, is it possible? But our first pushback to the Canadian company is, look, this is what it takes. You weren't going to find someone faster in Canada. That's why you chose this option. You want access to the best and brightest people who weren't part of your Canadian employment pool.
Right.
And even when we tell the Canadian companies, Mandar, we say, did you notice that the workers from Path to Canada, they already have jobs. You're not competing. A lot of them in the US have an awesome job on an H-1B. You don't have to compete against a US employer. You're competing with them to offer them the chance to come to Canada. They're going to wait, and they're choosing this opportunity. They're not going to get taken away by another US job offer. You have to be patient.
Yeah, it's really important distinction, Mark. You're absolutely right. They're not competing against US companies. They're competing against the US immigration system.
Right. Exactly.
And that's a broken, to be honest, it's a broken system, right? If you have to wait 20 years for a green card, who wants to wait? You know, so it's a good point to mention to folks in HR. You've been waiting forever. The job market in Canada is so tight. In Ontario alone, just even outside of tech, there are over 200,000 unfilled positions right now in the province of Ontario. That's what this is a huge labor and skill shortage in Canada. Employers can't find people. Wages are going up, especially in tech here. And I open the newspaper once a week. There's an article about how there's a new office for a large US tech company opening in Canada, making it harder for small and medium-sized Canadian tech companies to find skilled workers and compete against their salaries, right? And that's because Canadians are taking those jobs very fast. That doesn't mean you're going to get a low wage if you're not a Canadian. In fact, you have to be paid a wage consistent with what a Canadian would earn.
Right.
The difference is that employer is going to understand something. You are tied to them for the period of time that they're on their work permit, and likely until you get permanent residency. That can be 18 months to 2 years. So what I find is that Canadian employers, I say, how long are you going to keep that employee if you hire a Canadian? What's the turnaround?
Exactly.
Right. Yep. Canadian workers working in tech right now, if you keep someone for 2 years, they're like a senior engineer. They go from like entry level to the most senior person on your team. Right. So come on. You're hiring a foreign worker. This person has to be employed with you for 18 months to 2 years before they get to pay, and then they're grateful for it. You know, so you're gonna have a more committed worker on top of that, and the processing times, like Mark said, it's meaningless. It's going to take you months to find the Canadian who's going to stay, who's going to leave you in 6 months. So why don't you just go ahead, do this, get a worker who's committed, who's got the skills, and is maybe even working for a great US tech company already and has all the skills that you're looking for.
Great. No, that was great explanation, Daniel and Mark. We'll take one more question, and I will allow you guys to kind of close with your contact information and all. This has been great. So one question I would just say out loud here from Sumas is, if I'm a contractor working with an Indian company for a US client in USA, would like to come to Canada and work for the same US client, would you support? I'm guessing the answer is yes. Oh.
If the US client says they'll pay for the bill and sign the contract, it always goes back to the US. It's always it's always tough for us at Syndesis. We'll get calls with workers. They're like, oh, this sounds amazing. This sounds amazing. And we'll always say like, but your employer has to be on this phone call. They have to be nodding, saying this is amazing.
Right. So it's between you, the candidate, and the employer. So you three of you sit together and define a roadmap. How do you want to make it work? I guess. Yeah.
The only thing that I can contribute to that is that the wages that a person is probably earning as a contractor in India serving a U.S. client are going to be much lower than that same worker would have to earn in Canada, and that means a significant increase as well. So if a high skilled tech worker, for example, is earning 50,000 US dollars equivalent, that's not going to be enough to move the job to Canada. It's got to be in your $100,000 plus range. Mark, you can speak to that. There's got to be a budget in there, and if you turn to a US client or an Indian tech company and say, look, you got to double or triple what you're paying out right now, a lot of them are going to say, why would I do that? Some do for retention purposes. They want to keep the employee. They're a great employee. They're an asset, and they'll give them that raise if it means moving them to North America. My experience, though, has been a lot of them are saying, no, we're not going to do that. Go sign up on Path to Canada. And there'll be Canadian companies that are willing to pay.
Great. Oh, great. Thanks. That was great explanation. So any next steps or anything you want to add, Daniel and Mark, before we?
I think there's some good ones. Some of them are listed here for Daniel and I, how to reach us. And I'm looking at all the questions in the chat. Like there are so many. I was like, oh, we should have time to get to some of these. Yeah, there's quite a lot.
Unfortunately, I don't think we'll be able to get to them all either. My only suggestion is don't wait. If you think you might qualify, if you're interested, don't wait. Waiting is the enemy of immigration. Programs do change. Factors change. Things are good now. Maybe you qualify. I've had people that took a little bit too long. They waited, and then something changed about their circumstances. And I only wish you contacted me 6 months ago. Because 6 months ago, we had something for you. Now, unfortunately, it's not there anymore. So it's something important to keep in mind. Number one rule in immigration, if you qualify now, you apply now.
That's right. No, that's great. We have the contact information up on the slide. And as a reminder to all the audience, I will be having this video as a recorded session on the YouTube channel for you to refer back later on if you were not able to attend or attend partially. And in terms of contacting, you can connect directly with Syndesis or even with Daniel or myself. We all work together. If it's something that you are interested in, as Daniel mentioned, don't waste any time. Get in touch with us, and we'll get going. Anything you want to add, Mark?
Oh, just want to say thank you, Mandar. Thanks for having me on your channel. Very much appreciate it, and appreciate the opportunity to share this information with everyone.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks, Mark and Daniel.
Thank you, Mandar. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll stop the recording now.